I think we'll go ahead and get started this morning. That's loud. Okay, so thank you for coming out for the legislative breakfast this morning. This is the second time we've done that this year through the chamber, and we will not be doing any more of these, so you'll have to really stay tuned into your local media to find out what happens yet within the rest of the legislative session. It's really, really loud. Anyway, so I'd like to start this morning. We do not have a flag here this morning, but I'd like everybody to stand and visualize an American flag in your mind, and we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. So, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we're very honored this morning to have the three state legislators that represent Du Bois County present with us this morning. We have State Representative Steve Bartels and Shane Lindauer and our State Senator Mark Messmer. And the way we normally do this for anyone who's never been here before is we let them talk about some bills and progress really that's been made so far in the legislative session, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I'm going to let you guys decide who goes first.
The guy on the end?
It just makes sense. I'm not sure if that is.
Okay. That's okay, there we go. Okay, well, welcome everybody this morning. Just a couple things. I'm not going to cover some of the big bills all the way in case some of my colleagues have some comments on them, but House Bill 1001 was the budget, which I'm fairly happy with. There's quite a few things that I'm not, and as you know, this is a huge bill, and so we either vote for or against some things. But there are some things that I think all of us say we don't particularly care for in there. I'm happy that we're doing some of these one-time strategic capital investments, that we're not actually trying to grow government, that we're trying to actually help our communities and our state with the quality of workplace, quality of life, those kind of issues on a one-time basis. When we look at House Bill 1002, I've been an advocate of, when we talk about high school, is hands-on apprenticeships. I like the building trades with it. They have that offer at in the high schools. It seems like there's just a few high schools throughout the state that are operating under that. But great opportunities for our kids to do hands-on training and try to start focusing that path in the state of Indiana. House Bill 1006, kind of as a former law enforcement officer and also county council president, once you get a chance to read that bill and kind of look at what it really does, is it actually provides some opportunities for our court systems and our law enforcement officers to help people with mental illness. And as a lot of times you get in a position as a police officer and you're kind of forced to take custody of somebody that needs help, and this is just a way to kind of help facilitate getting people the right treatment. And so when you get a chance to take a look at that, this would actually be really good for the state and our community. Some of my big legislative priorities this year have been 1017, which I've been talking about for 4 years. You would think it would get through the finish line, but we actually got a hearing this year, and it passed the House Committee, House Ways and Means, and the House floor unanimously, which is unusual. But now it's in the Senate. That's that drug donation program. And so we're kind of fighting a little bit with pharma on what drugs they want to kind of exclude for a few drugs, and they're the most expensive drugs, and the ones that are predominantly going to be given to citizens basically when they're dying. So it's just literally trying to prolong their life and trying to increase their quality of life, and pharma is actually trying to exclude those drugs. Like, these are the ones that people need the most. So we'll see what happens. The Senate had a hearing and it got held, so we're going to fight this fight next Wednesday on that. Huge bill for me is number 1623. That's agency rulemaking and oversight and transparency. Had some of the same language last year that kind of had some problems in the Senate. We put in another bill and the governor vetoed it, so I'm pretty happy that I got my first veto bill last year. We'll see what happens to 1623, but what it does is it changes the way the agencies can make rules, put some parameters, it makes it more transparent. When they publish their notice of intent to make a rule, they actually have to publish the language of the rule, which is huge. The other thing they have to do, and they've already had to do this, is they have to provide what we used to call a financial impact statement. It's going to be a regulatory analysis. It's going to be the same thing. The bottom line is, how does this financially impact our citizens and our communities? And so they're supposed to have already been doing that, and they're not doing that. So part of this also bill has a consequence. And so in this bill also is the ability for our citizens to sue our agencies if, if somehow they were judged on not a rule of law. And we've seen that throughout several agencies where they actually say, hey, this is our policy, this is some things we want to see, but they didn't go through the process of making an administrative code, or did they ask us to do it in statute. So some of our citizens are actually being restricted, fined for some of these things, and we want to make sure that if they do, the citizens have the recourse and start countersuing our government on that. That's kind of that. There's 1,200, which is a task force which created that 1623. So we're asking the task force to allow that task force to go another year. I'd like to say it go a little bit longer. And the other thing that's significant in that small little bill, hidden back at the very end, is that right now there's one agency in statute that says they cannot evaluate their employees based on number of fines and amount of fines, and that's the Department of Revenue. We all know that our state police at some point in time, there was this uproar about them doing the 25 tickets per month, and it's the end of the month, and everybody would make a joke about how they're, it must be towards the end of the month. Well, the philosophy is the same, right? So we're not about finding our citizens, we're about contacts. And so in the very back of this bill is no employee of an agency can be evaluated favorably for actions of how much fines they've done or how many fines. And so we're taking that out so everybody's treated fairly. House Bill 1142, this is about law enforcement recordings. And so if you're a county councilor or a city council, you'll appreciate this. Is what we're seeing is now that more and more people, law enforcement, are wearing body cams, that somebody will come in and say, hey, I want to get a copy of that under open door. Well, it takes a lot of man hours, you provide these copies, and all this basically says is that the agency, local unit of government, has the right to charge for that and also charge labor to edit things out. For example, a lot of people want the whole body cam. Well, 2 hours before that in the car when the officer's like me, who's drinking some coffee most of the time and listen to the radio, none of that should be admissible in that open door policy based on whatever their action. So it's just, it just allows local units of government to start charging, including labor. 1186 is something that has been worked on for several years, and this is the encroachment, if you're not familiar with it. So what this bill does, it says an officer has a right to say, stay back, and you have to stay back 25 feet. If you violate that, you could actually be committing a crime. And part of that stems from the training of the Law Enforcement Academy. It's called the 21-second rule. And they teach that within 21 feet, sorry, I said second, but within 21 feet, that's the minimum, or I should say the minimum amount that can be next to you that you'd have a chance to react with either lethal or non-lethal force. And so that kind of fits, and that's what the Law Enforcement Academy is training, is the 21 feet, and this bill says 25 feet. 1201 is the Rare Disease Advisory Council. We kind of did this to spark some thought about these issues in the state, one of these rare diseases, and literally didn't think it was going to move anywhere. All of a sudden, a bunch of people got a hold of it and found out how important this really is. And what this does is we're finding out there are citizens in our state with these rare diseases. We're not really sure what they need. Some of their needs, their caregivers' needs. And so this council was put together to specifically say, okay, in the state of Indiana, when we have somebody with a rare disease, how are we going to facilitate their needs along with the caregivers' needs? Because it's unique from hospitals and long-term healthcare facilities. 1203, pass the House. What that is, elimination of textbook fees. There's several people been working on this for years, but we got a bill that crossed the House, and now it's been sucked up in the budget, so you won't see that anymore. But we passed the House, and I think the Senate is favorable on it also. House Bill 1323. This is something I co-authored with an NRA guy. What we're starting to do is we're starting to find out that the federal government is going into communities and demanding their local law enforcement provide all the information anybody that's applied for a handgun permit. It's really outside their scope, so what this does, and there's a couple states that have already done this, is say, look, you have the right to inquire data about our citizens if it's an investigation. And so we kind of narrow that scope. You can just blanketly ask for all the information people have a gun in our state. So that kind of just narrows the federal government's scope with acting in our state. I think I'll just talk about one more. I've got quite a few on the docket this year, but Senate Bill 136, which is the sponsor from the Senate. And what this does is help facilitate when we pass constitutional carry. We talked about having a database, and everybody freaked out about having a database when we were having these conversations. But what this actually does is now go back and say, this would be helpful for our police departments to have this database. And this database is a prohibited person. So what this bill does is say, here's a definition of a prohibited person, and gives our law enforcement agencies the authority to coordinate with like NCIC, IDEX, and all these other programs that have these list of peoples that would be prohibited by our state law. And so all that makes it is a quicker way for law enforcement officers in the field to say, hey, look, I need to check this on this database, and it'll come back if they're a prohibited person, and they know they're not allowed to carry a handgun. So I've got a bunch of bills on the list. You can see military tourism, building code violations, and even going back to where you can have throwing stars at certain recreational things. So I'll go and turn it over.
First of all, I just want to say thank you I'm Shane Lindauer. I'm state representative for District 63, which encompasses portions of DuBois, Davies, Pike, and actually now most of Martin County. So this is our 6th session. Steve and I came in together. So I just appreciate you all being here and taking part in the process. I appreciate the Chamber for putting it on, and WJTS for letting us be here today and using the space. So I had 7 bills. We talked about this a little bit last time at the last meeting. For those of you who weren't here, I had 7 bills. 5 of those came directly from constituents here in district that were ideas that were brought to us. I think we've talked up here regularly about many of the bills, many of the ideas we get come directly from constituents. And so I would just encourage, reaching out to us if you see an issue, see a problem, have a question or concern about something. And I know all of us up here are more than happy to talk about those things and see if there's a solution moving forward for some of those things. So with that, I had 2 bills pass out of the House. One, actually got a hearing on in the Senate, and working with Mark here on mine reclamation tax credits. What the bill does is provide an incentive for businesses to invest or develop on reclaimed coal mine ground. So Pike County, for instance, is very aggressively trying to find people to come in and help with, they have an AV problem, an assessed value problem, where they just don't have a lot of money coming in to their county. And they, to their credit, are not sitting back waiting for something, hoping for something to happen. They are aggressively, about as aggressive as anybody I've seen, I know Mark's worked with them too, trying to find a solution to that problem. And so what this bill does, like I said, it provides a tax credit, and what that credit is, it's kind of a moving target right now. It started out at 25% tax credit for the price of the project. It was amended a little bit in Ways and Means in the House. I think it's going to get amended again in the Senate on Tuesday as it's going to get heard over there. So we'll see what works out. But again, that incentive for a developer to come in and put a new business on property there that some folks are a little leery to build on. And so that's really kind of the push behind, or the idea behind that bill. Then there was the bill I had as outdoor refreshment areas. Basically, that allowed a city or a town to adopt an ordinance that would allow them to designate areas of their city or town that would be exempt from certain open carry laws, open container laws that are currently on the books. So this would be a year, it's not like a festival, like a one-time event. This would be a year-round space that Jasper, Huntingburg, whatever, if they adopted this ordinance. And there are guardrails on that as well. There are certain things that they have to meet. The ATC is still putting some guardrails, some stipulations on that as far as size and signage and things like that. So that came from a group in Jasper. I had never heard of these. DORAs, they're called. Ohio's got some, Michigan's got some. They're pretty far ahead of the game in that. And it seems to be a great way to, just create more of a, we talk a lot about brain drain and those kind of things. So this is another tool, hopefully in the tool bag for cities and towns, to create little areas that are, more festive and attractive to young adults, young talent, young families, that kind of thing. So those are the 2 bills that ended up passing out of the House onto the Senate. A couple of weeks ago, Senator Messmer and I were at an event, and I recounted a story I heard from Tom Washburn was Steve and I served a year with him before he retired. He was somebody I admired and respected a great deal. And one of the things he did on one of his last days was, rather than count the accomplishments or the bills he passed, he had a list of, and these were his words, right, dumb things that he stopped from happening, right? And so that really resonated with me. And so this year we were able to, there was a bill, a lot of good stuff in the bill, but at the end of the day, it was going to force all septic installers to get a license. And so I've, if you're a builder, I've got a guy I know who's been doing this for, God, I don't know, 10, 15 years, and probably all of us in here got somebody we know who's installed septics at some point. Excuse me. So this was going to make him go and get a license to do that, and so we were able to stop that, to get that stripped out of the bill. So I was having a conversation with a gentleman here this morning about the deregulation or the over-regulation that sometimes happens. Again, well-meaning, a lot of good stuff in that particular bill, I think, but this was just a little component that some of us worked on together and were able to get it stripped out. So other little stories like that is always nice to kind of get those little wins, I think, and make sure we're not overburdening folks at home. So on the Senate side, what they've sent, I'm the chairman of Natural Resources, so they sent I'll get the agency bill. So every year, agencies, whether it's Natural Resources or IDEM or NDOT, whatever it may be, have their bills of changes and administration. Typically, it's not major changes typically, but they would like to see, and so that has to come to the legislature for approval. So that's a bill we'll be working on next week to try to make sure that that gets in a good spot, and there's nothing hidden in there. I think sometimes the agency bills have stuff that maybe we didn't anticipate, and things go through that we weren't big fans of in retrospect. So just trying to make sure we do our due diligence on that. Steve mentioned several of the House priority bills. I was co-author on 1008. I don't think you talked about 1008, which some of you I'm sure have heard of, the ESG, environmental social governance factors that are at play in investing and banking large scale in really around the world. And so in this bill, House Bill 1008, basically prohibits INPERS, which is the Indiana retirement investing, from investing in anything ESG related if the primary goal is not a fiduciary goal. So basically it just says you can invest in whatever you want as long as your primary goal is that a lens of a fiduciary responsibility to your investor. So that's a bill that passed the House. It's on to the Senate as well. So several others. Happy to talk about any of those as time goes on. But with that, I turn it over to Mark here.
All right, thank you, and thank you guys, and thank you for being here today. I started out the session with 9 bills that I had filed, and 3 of them got amended into other bills. My Senate Bill 333 got amended into House Bill 1575. My Senate Bill 349 that dealt with the Underground Liability Trust Fund got amended into Senate Bill 246, which was kind of an overall underground tank bill. This Deceptive Sales Act enforcement, Senate Bill 328, is going to be put in the budget, and I think Mike Speedy had a House bill companion to that that it did pass, and we could have passed it, but I think the Appropriations Chairman wants to move the oversight of the fines that come through the Deceptive Sales Act enforcement and have it oversight by the State Budget Committee rather than, I think there's a Indiana Finance Authority, there's some other state budget agency, there's a different agency that oversees that fund, and they have to request money from that fund, for the department. It just gets used to, for enforcement of this Deceptive Acts programs, but Budget Committee is a little more friendly to the Attorney General right now than the Budget Agency. A little spat going between the Governor and the Attorney General. The only bill that died completely was Senate Bill 329. It was an additional court for Du Bois County. It got very positive hearing in Judiciary Committee. And then I don't know exactly what happened between the chairman of that committee and the Senate Pro Tem, but, and then I think all the courts were in one bill in the House, and the fiscal folks in the House and Senate said, we're not moving any courts this year. I don't know why. But that's where that bill is at. I do have one Senate Joint Resolution 18 that allows legislators to be voting members on boards and commissions that we serve on. And it really would go hand in hand with House Bill, the intent of House Bill 1623. A little more oversight over groups like IDEM. I mean, when those agencies, and I say this, I probably said it every year, when we deal with agency rulemaking, every year we have got multiple bills. It's like whack-a-mole. You know, they have rulemaking authority, they can adopt rules, and you look at the statutes, and if it doesn't say they can't, they feel like they can. And so you're constantly knocking back agency rulemaking decisions that they've made. And putting, you know, we serve on almost all boards and commissions. There's legislators on them, but we currently, the Constitution says we can't be voting members. We can't have any oversight, whatever, over the executive agency. And what Senate Joint Resolution 18 we have to change the Constitution to allow this. So we have passed the bill out of the resolution out of the Senate this year. The House would have to pass it either this year or next year. And then in 2 years, we'd have to do it again. And then 2026, we'd have to have it would go on the ballot in the fall for a change in that. But without some type of ability to vote on those committees, we're on them, but we are not allowed to vote. And so, you know, I've always viewed that as a pretty big waste of time for us to, you know, because it really doesn't give you any oversight. I guess it does give you a clue as to what rules are coming or what actions of those agencies are coming, so we can play whack-a-mole in session again. Senate Bill 331, it got passed out of the House Courts and Criminal Committee this week, and that bill, the nexus of that bill, it's my shortest bill. I think it might only be 5 words, but it's the most important bill that I've got this session. And the nexus of that bill started, as many of our bills do, started in 2018. I had a mom whose daughter was being groomed by a sex predator, and there was nothing in statute until he had transmitted or convinced her to transmit sexually explicit images, or he had actually molested her. There was nothing that parent could do to stop that contact and that behavior of that dad. And so as we worked through the Indiana Prosecutor Association that summer, looked at how we could deal with that, and what we ended up coming up for that solution was to let a parent or guardian of a minor, when they're being groomed by another adult, to get a protective order against that adult. And then if those text messages and if that contact and behavior continues, now they've committed a felony, and now they've got ability to pursue them. Well, that led into an entire Senate Bill 551 in 2019 that had that piece in it. It had the child deposition piece in it, and then it had, I think, 7 or 8 other just enhancements to victims of crimes, giving people that are victims of crimes more protection. But the piece in there dealing with the child depositions, we decided in the Senate committee to take that out and work on that as just a standalone item, over the summer, and bring it back in 2020. And so in 2020, I had Senate Bill 206 that was just the child deposition piece, and children under the age of 16 in 46 other states and under federal law, the defense attorneys can't depose that child sex abuse victim, don't have any access to them. Well, we gave a little carve out that, if in the interest of justice, that maybe that child can't be at trial, that under very extenuating circumstances, the defense attorneys can petition the judge, to allow that deposition. But the prosecutors have to be allowed to be present if it does occur. And because currently, under a prior law, the prosecutor couldn't be there. And they would bring in these young sex abuse victims, and defense attorneys would batter them, mentally, to the point where most of the time the parents would not bring that child back to court, because they didn't want to put them through that trauma again. So that bill passed unanimously in 2020 in the House and Senate, and then immediately upon passage, the ACLU challenged it in court and got an injunction saying that it was denying constitutional protections of the defendant. So that went through the court processes, and on June 23rd of 2022, the Indiana Supreme Court upheld that law. And said it was constitutional, that it was, because we have one of these regional child interview centers here down on 5th Street, where they bring the child in, they bring, there are people that are trained on having kids explain the process of what they went through. And the prosecutors say many times, we'll view that video, and that video has to be given to the defendant. And he said many times, we'll determine there's not enough evidence to pursue criminal charges. And that video process is what is used to for the defendant to know what he's facing. Well, as soon as that law got upheld, within a month, in 3 counties in Indiana, and the deposition process is under Trial Court Rule 30. So they started using Trial Court Rule 31, written depositions, to go after, and there's no difference between a written deposition means, and if you're a small child that can't read, that means that they've got to read the questions to you, and then you've got to respond, and the answer is in writing, but the defendant is in the room. And the point of that deposition bill was, not to have that kid be under the pressure of being in the presence of the defendant during that deposition. Or they were using what was called an informal interview. And the only difference between an interview and a deposition is that in an interview, there's no court-appointed, transcriber there writing things down, but the process is exactly the same. And when we were working on that bill in 2006, myself and the prosecutors, we had that prohibition of the interview in the bill, and Greg Steuerwald said, God bless Greg Steuerwald, he said, no forthright, attorney, no decent person would ever use an interview to skirt the prohibition of a deposition. Well, that took less than a month. So in 2 counties, they were using an informal interview, and one of them they used a written deposition to try to take a sidestep around the law. So Senate Bill 331 closes that loophole. It stops at Trial Court Rule 30, adds Trial Court Rule 31, or any informal interview, interview or whatever. It's not even a complete sentence, but it closes the loophole and puts finality on, we intended to protect child sex abuse victims when we passed that law. And it passed out of committee, passed out of the Senate unanimously, it passed out of committee Tuesday or Wednesday? Tuesday, I believe, unanimously. So confident it's going to make it through and do the job that we intended to. Senate Bill 332 provides more detail to our 3-mile buffer zone around Crane, Grissom, and Lake Glendora, which is a connection, a base connected to Crane. And it really codifies what we intended the practice to be in those buffer zones. We're going to do a little bit of tweaking in the House because some counties have plan commissions but don't have zoning. So right now it says plan commission and zoning. We're going to change it to an or, because there's counties that do part of the process but maybe don't have countywide zoning. It does require real estate disclosures to people that are selling property within that buffer zone, and the realtors and the title company attorneys had some pretty good suggestions to that, because it's model code that was issued by the Defense Department to put in all the states where they have bases. But they said, you know, the process of that disclosure needed some more detail to make sure it worked, you know, the way it's intended to, and to protect, you know, so the real, if the, you know, kind of put the onus on the property owner, not on the, you know, not on the realtor. If a person, you know, didn't disclose it accidentally, whatever, and then it doesn't void the real estate transaction if there is a failure to disclose. Things that, I mean, they're logical sense, it's just that kind of detail that when they put model legislation like that, they don't necessarily think they're all the nitty gritty. And on those plan commissions, it gives the base commander a non-voting member on those plan commissions, so they can be the eyes and ears, you know, for what's going on. But I mean, functionally, it's most of what was in our prior law dealing with that 3-mile buffer zone. But it just, Cass County had actually a more robust process than what we were asking for, so we grandfathered them in because they've already got basically what we're asking for and then some. So we said anybody that had a plan in place before, you know, January 1st was exempt, and Cass County does. So, and they're one of the border counties to Grissom. Senate Bill 390, it's a incentive program. I passed Senate Rolled Act 411 last year that set up statewide standards for renewable, whether it's wind or solar standards. No counties have adopted it yet. I know Du Bois County is looking at it. 38 counties have no ordinances of any kind dealing with wind and solar development. 54 have some degree of ordinances. Some of them are very close to what we had in Senate Bill 411. Purdue over the summer did an analysis of all 54 counties that have legislation in place and compared it to Senate Bill 411 and looked, and there's about 10 counties that could do some very minor tweaking and comply with, you know, that, and then they would be eligible for a $1 per megawatt hour of output, and we clarified in the bill that it has to be, you know, at the end of each year you verify the output that your wind or solar system created, and then the money goes to the local government unit, not to the developer of the project. It goes to the county to go to their use for, you know, funding for things within the county. We originally had a state appropriation in there, but Ryan Hadley is the chief executive officer of the Indiana Office of Energy Development. He called me about 2 weeks before the first half was over and said, you know, Mark, we like this, and it's all May provisions. We're not telling them, it's all the Indiana Office of Energy Development may set it up, they may establish a fund, they may, you know, we give them control. He said we like the program, we want to move forward with it, but we don't feel like we need any state dollars to do it. He said the U.S. Department of Energy probably has, you know, grant funding that we can apply for that would fund it, and so, you know, take the state appropriation out of it. When we did that, I was having a little trouble on the Appropriations Committee, you know, getting past their fiscal oversight, and I think their intent was just to move it with no funding and then look at putting it in the budget at the end of the session if there was money to deal with. But we've got commitments from the OED that they don't need any state funding, that they'll try to apply for some federal grants if none are available. Then the project, that incentive program just doesn't move forward. But the goal would be to get statewide uniformity on siting standards, you know, to make it more competitive for people that are wanting to look at developing, you know, renewable projects in the state. I think there was a couple of the development wind and solar companies, you know, put out, you know, projects for inquiry for some wind development this past year, and not one county in Indiana. I mean, the counties that have wind have a ton of wind projects, and so there was a multi-billion-dollar project that ended up going to Illinois, and it's going to be, you know, I mean, it'll be for power that's going to come to Indiana consumers, but they couldn't find a site, and, you know, a lot of that has to do with because there's no ordinance or because of the prohibitive ordinances. But local units of government will still have control if they want to keep the ordinances in place. They can do that completely. Senate Bill 472 was an advanced recycling bill that I passed out of the Senate. I think it was unanimously. There was a couple of no votes. But it codifies a process used by a company called Brightmark up in Ashley. And they recycle, the hard to recycle plastics are the plastics 3 through 7. Your number 1 and number 2, your milk jugs, your water bottles, detergent bottles. There's a lot of commercial reuse of those number 1 and 2 plastics. The 3 through 7, your microwave dishes, your butter dishes, things are these. They are hard to recycle. Nobody wants them. But this Brightmark company, they take them and they can either break them back down into number 3 through 7 plastic. They've got 60 different products that they produce out of that plant. Or they can break it down to the base elements that the plastics were made of and sell off just the individual components. But they have no waste products that come out of that plant. And they're currently operating, and in 2006, we asked IDEM to adopt rules, for recycling programs, in a broad way across the state. One of them was, the process that Ashley's using, that was 7 years ago, so 2016. And we had other recycling programs that they still hadn't moved on last year, that we did a bunch of, where you had an industrial waste. I did a beneficial reuse that I worked on with Representative Speedy last year to speed up the process. Since they wouldn't adopt rules, they hadn't adopted rules in now 7 years for this. We just codified, the process, or took away their ability to make rules on a lot of, what's nothing more than just industrial waste. It's not toxic waste. It's just, to speed up the process of getting solid waste back into commercial products. And this bill basically does the same. And IDEM did not oppose this bill. They were happy with it because it's really codifying what they're doing today. If they need an air permit, they still got to get an air permit. If they need a water discharge permit, they still got to get a water discharge permit. But they don't need a permit to do the process they're doing of recycling those products back into commercial products. A couple of them that I was involved in that weren't mine that I authored. Senate Bill 13. I did talk to the House Chairman because he originally wasn't planning on hearing it, but maybe I got him to reconsider. We are one of only 9 states that has truck speed limits at 65 and car speed limits at 70. Only 9 states still do that. And NDOT came into the committee and said that causes about $400 million of excess, traffic collisions. And they said it would probably drop based on statistics that they've done in the 41 other states. It would probably drop our wrecks on highways, drop them by 20% on interstates, and save consumers about $400 million in collision damages each year. When I talked about with Representative Presley, he said, maybe I'll hear that one. He initially was, I'm not messing with that. He said that the big trucking companies, don't like it. I said, well, if they have fleets and their fleets are computerized, set to run at 65, and the guy in committee said, we set some at 65, some at 68, some at, well, if you're setting your, and they do it for fuel usage, because they don't care if it takes, if they're driving 500 miles a day, they don't care if it takes them, 30 minutes longer to get, on their long hauls. But not every truck is going to be, on one of those fleet governed systems. And if they want to continue to do that, have at it. But they did say that it is a huge problem with, cars getting backed up behind, 2 trucks trying to pass for 3 or 4 or 5 miles. We've all had it behind, we've all followed them. And then when they clear, cars, have a wild breakout and unnecessary wrecks. So hopefully that one moves. And Senate Bill 451, in 5 years ago now, 2018, we authorized a pilot project up near Terre Haute, Wabash Valley Resources, and their plan is to take an old hydrogen plant and make ammonia, which, the only ammonia sources we have in the U.S. are Chinese and Russian. The sources for ammonia in this country, there's little to none of it produced here. These guys would make an agricultural product that's greatly needed. And there's the pore space under the plant, and then they figure before within the lifetime of the plant they would need probably another site in the next county over. It would allow them to inject the CO2 down into the pore space 5,000 to 8,000 feet below the ground. And last year we passed House Bill 1209, which covered the entire state for doing that, except since we had already started the pilot project, it exempted them. And so this year we're trying to put some code in place to cover that. And the problem the Farm Bureau has had with this specific bill, that they want to be able to be paid for the storage space under, because as you put the CO2 down under the ground, it makes a plume down under the ground, and they wanted to be able to, for the farmers who have that CO2 under their space, they consider that to be a mineral right or a private property right. Well, in 17 states that have had CO2 injection issues go to court, 17 out of 17, the courts have ruled there is zero value to CO2 injection into the ground, and there is no mineral right lost, and there's no property right lost. And I think the guy who's got the pilot project really doesn't want to go to court, which it probably will at some point go to court anyway, but he doesn't want to have to go to court to fight that. He's trying to get his permits for the, he's got his operating permit, but he's trying to get his injection permit from the EPA, and this is an issue that's kind of got the process hung up. It does require the owner of the project in Terre Haute, it does require him to pay for mediation, and it requires him to pay $250 an acre for that storage space under the neighboring farms. The current storage price for natural gas storage, the going rate is $50 an acre. When you inject natural gas down into that pore space, it does the exact same thing. The city of Huntingburg has, in the past, had done gas storage. I would assume, I don't know if Jasper did, but I know Huntingburg did at one time. You inject it down in the ground, and the difference between CO2 and natural gas, you put the natural gas down there, it's a commodity that you're going to take back out later and sell. When you put the CO2 down there, it just stays there forever. So they have agreed to pay a lease payment for that storage, 5 times the going rate for natural gas. They've agreed to pay for mediation, and we passed that out of the Senate 29 to whatever, 11, 21, or 29, yeah, whatever, my math is bad. But it did pass the first half, it's off to the House, hopefully they'll be kind to it. Because it is needed, and it's a pilot project only, it only applies to the Vermilion County and Vigo County. The rest of the state all falls under House Bill 1209 primaries was set up last year. And BP and Exxon, and I mean all these other big, BP primarily is pushing the House Bill 1209 rules. They're not worried about paying leases. It allows it in 1209, but they know, and they're willing to fight it because they got a lot bigger pockets than the guy in Terre Haute, and they know they're never going to pay a penny. So they allowed it to be part of the process in House Bill 1209 last year, but they know 17 out of 17 is pretty good odds. And so, I mean, I viewed that, and every Farm Bureau local group that's come up, they come up and talk to us every year. I've told them that, and the farmers that are in the area of this plant don't like what Farm Bureau is doing. They want to be able to move ahead. Senator Ford had a meeting with him during the break, and he said he was afraid he was really going to get lambasted. Like, no, these guys are getting in our way. They don't represent what we as the people impacted by this pilot plant are doing. And so hopefully it moves. Just some general statistics from the first half of session. And you guys probably had the halftime statistics as well if one of you brought the, but I think percentage-wise it's about the same. So we had 484 bills passed, 484 filed, 164 passed. I think you guys had 178 passed, which was 34% of the introduced bills. I think the number was about the same in the House and Senate as far as passage. 91 of those passed unanimously, which is 55%, and 150 of those passed with bipartisan support, which is 91% of the bills. And it's usually 90 to 95% bipartisan. I mean, that is typical every session. Oh, and again, 178 bills passed the House, but I think their passage rate, it might have been 33, 34%. It was about the same. Some of the priority bills that we had as a Senate caucus, Senate Bill 1 lays the groundwork for more behavioral health regional facilities to be built. The funding for that will be in the budget. I don't know what was in the budget for the first half, but the money's in the budget. The framework is in Senate Bill 1. Just more access, to mental health services for folks across the state. It's something that's needed everywhere. Senate Bill 2 is our Senate Enrolled Act 2. It's already been passed in the House and Senate, signed by the governor. If you're a sub-S corporation or an LLC, and if you're a sub-S, whatever the profit the company makes, the owners of the company break that profit down and claim it on their individual income taxes. It would allow the companies to pay their state income tax, and currently on your federal income tax, there's a $10,000 cap on state taxes that you can deduct. And a lot of other states have this, where this would allow the company to pay the tax, for the business owner, and then if the state taxes that are paid are more than $10,000, you get to deduct the entirety of that, on your federal income taxes. It doesn't impact state tax payments at all. It just gives you the ability to deduct the full amount of that on your federal taxes. And I think they estimated it was going to save businesses $50 million a year in federal taxes, by if they would adopt it and every company would utilize it. Senate Bill 3 it sets up a task force to study the elimination of income taxes. I don't know if it can be done. I mean, every state probably per person probably spends pretty much between sales tax, income tax, the corporate income tax. I mean, all the different taxes that the state collects. It's just gonna look at, is it possible to just eliminate income taxes? And yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to just look to see what other tax sources are available. What's the growth in the different tax programs that we have, and we'll see where it goes. But that was a bill to task force to review that. Senate Bill 4 sets up a local option for counties to apply for grants. They would put their needs of use together, and submit them to the state health department. But the administration of the grants would be by the state budget committee, not by the state health department. And I think there was a lot of fear that if the state health department, oversaw the granting, it would allow counties to enhance their local health services as they see fit. The county council and the county commissioners have to approve it, approve the grant request, and the county has to have a 25% match, and whatever if they're going to ask for more of a grant for immunizations or maternal health. Programs for young infants, whatever the programs, any programs that they administer, they can ask for additional grant funding to enhance that. But that county's got to kick in 25%, and the commissioners and the council have to approve the request. And but we didn't want the state health department to then administer those grants and use that as leverage to get them to do things that they otherwise wouldn't want to do. So. As it started, it was state health department administered. I was not a fan of it, but they pared it down quite a bit. Leave it all up to local control, and allows the state budget committee to approve them rather than the state health department. Senate Bill 5 is a bill that deals with access to personal data, giving Hoosiers more protection on companies that just buy large data sources and sell them. It allows a person to identify who's got your personal data, and allows the individuals the opportunity to delete their private information from companies that are into the data, data collection source. I think it starts only with you have to have a database of 100,000 people or more, so it's not gonna, and it doesn't affect banks and hospitals like medical records, and I mean it exempts a lot of normal business activities that were, and really only applies to large data companies. It was a bill that was modeled after a law they passed in Virginia last year, and just looking at giving Hoosiers more protection of their personal data. Senate Joint Resolution 1 would allow a constitutional change. Right now, you can only deny bail for people that are being held for murder, and this would allow. It would allow, here again, a resolution that has to pass this year, again in 2 years, and then get approved on the ballot in 2026. But it would allow the courts to keep suspects who are considered a danger to the public at risk, a substantial risk to the public. So you might be a violent criminal who's been in for multiple violent crimes, and a lot of it has to do with fighting the no bail projects that have popped up in places around the country. But it would give judges the ability, if somebody is considered a substantial risk to the public, to hold them without bail beyond just a murder suspect. Then I've got a few bills that I'm sponsoring that these guys didn't send me. And one that we passed out of the Senate a couple times, and then just met some resistance in the House Transportation Committee. So this year, the House Transportation Committee chairman authored House Bill 1015, and I'm a co-sponsor of. It's a pilot project for the NDOT can buy for 4 places in the state, four pilot project areas, speed enforcement cameras in construction zones. And I had a little heartburn with that, in the past. But you have to be going 11 miles per hour or higher, than the speed limit. The first time you get an infraction, and it takes a picture of your plate. There has to be warning signs before you get to the zone, and there have to be workers present. It can't be a construction zone at midnight where there's nobody there. Workers must be present. You have to be going 11 miles per hour or more over. And the first time you get a warning, the second time you get a $75 fine, and the third time you get a $150 fine. And statistically, in states that have done that, after the first offense, only 4% ever have a repeat offense. So, I mean, it does do, and when you have construction zones and you've got areas narrowed down into 1 or maybe 2 lanes and no shoulders, the state police actually came and testified neutral on the bill. In the past, they had been a little bit opposed. They said it's more dangerous for them when they are in a construction zone. And then they said you really can't stop somebody in a construction zone, because if you stop traffic in a construction zone to give somebody a speeding ticket, you're creating a bigger hazard. So they typically let them run through, they have to detect them, follow them for 2 or 3 miles, get out of the zone, and then pull them over. And then that takes them out of the enforcement ability. Or if they're parked at the front end of a construction zone, all the people that slam on their brakes, ends up creating problems. And I think there was 32 people killed in construction zones in 2019 and 28 last year. And some of them are workers, and the majority of them are people that are driving the cars. Some are construction workers, but the majority are individuals. House Bill 1072. Currently, airports, and I don't know if Travis is here, he's going to like this bill if he's not. Aviation fuel has to pay the 1 penny per gallon underground storage tank, fee. But none of them have underground storage tanks. Some of them have underground piping, that, should it have a leak, could collect from a penny per gallon that they collect. But it would allow aviation fuels, it would allow a portion of that to be, carved off, within NDOT, and allow them to use it for other airport projects. Because they're paying the fee. They currently, almost none of them have underground tanks. If they have above ground tanks, they already have to be in a dike or containment area that holds the entirety of the tank. So, the odds of them ever collecting, something for a tank repair or a tank leak are zero, because everything has to be contained. Any above ground tanks have to have full containment. So it would just give them some flexibility to use that to do projects within the airport. And they couldn't build I don't think they're allowed to use it to build a hangar, but they would be able to do runway improvements, safety improvements. I don't think there was any opposition to that bill in the House. A bill that I'm working on with Representative McNamara, House Bill 1195. It moves oversight of the grant funding for the domestic violence grants from the Division of Domestic Violence Program and Treatment Council. That council that administers those grants currently, many times they represent people that are getting a grant, and so they have to recluse themselves from voting, and then that gives them problems where many months go along where they can't get a quorum, because they have people that have to be excused from voting because they might be a recipient of the grant. So they're going to move that granting program to the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute, which I think they said functionally they've been having to do it for the last couple of years because of the difficulty of getting that group to ever have a quorum and get those grants moving. So it'll make them more efficient in getting those grants to the groups around the state that use them. And that passed unanimously out of committee this week. Working with Shane on the outdoor refreshment area bill. House Bill 1544, it clarifies, so about probably, 40 years ago, there's things called pre-mixed cocktails in a can. And the first of those that came out were wine coolers. And so when the wine coolers came out, in Indiana, we're the only state in the country that has this, but you can either have, as a wholesaler, you can only have beer and wine, or wine and spirits. And as a wholesaler, you can't have all three. Don't ask me why. Some prohibition issue that was done 100 years ago. But so when the wine coolers came out, they were in the wine section. And so if you sold beer or wine, you could sell it. If you sold wine or spirits, you could sell it. And then about 25 years ago, the manufacturers of those products moved in what are called malt-based premixed cocktails, which malt-based products would be beer. And they didn't want to put it in the beer section. The guys that have the wine and spirits said, oh, you can't put it under the beer section because we can't sell it. So they said, okay, we'll put the malt-based products in the wine section of code. So if you sell beer or wine, you can sell it. If you sell wine and spirits, you can sell it. Well, a couple years ago, most of the manufacturers of those products have started to shift to spirits-based products. The alcohol content, the taste of the products is really no different. But the trend is to have spirits-based products. Well, the spirits guys say, well, you can't let the beer guys have these spirits-based products. They're a spirit, not a beer, not a wine. Well, it doesn't unlevel the playing field. When the spirits guys were given access to beer products by putting it into the wine section, by now the trend is to, and all this bill does is puts the definition of the spirits-based products into the wine section. And this was, ATC was the one who suggested that. It's not unleveling the playing field, it's leveling the playing field. Because 25 years ago, it worked for the spirits guys to sell the beer-based products. So why is it now it's so unfair to let the beer guys sell the spirit, because Anheuser-Busch has one of those products. Well, the Anheuser-Busch distributors can't sell it because it's a spirits-based product, not a beer-based product. So we'll see where that goes. I don't know if it'll get a hearing or not. I think it will, but we just never know with our chairman. Another bill I'm working on that came from Representative Karakoff is House Bill 1204. And currently, if DOT or the state police, if they pull over a semi and they're overweight and they get them by even uneven loads in trucks, it causes one axle weight to be out of compliance, or and currently the process for the fines for these folks, it's $10,000 on the first offense. And some of these guys have, a lot of money racked up in a small trucking company. It can put you out of business pretty fast. So House Bill 1204 stages the fines down to $500 for the first offense, $1,000 for the second, and up to $10,000. If you have a lot of repeat offenses, but it's gonna stage those fines in and not get allow them to be hit with $10,000 fines, and because they can rack a lot of money up in a short time. And the individual axle weight is not necessarily easy for the person to turn when they're loading a truck, and how a load gets shifted in a bed can get them overweight. And the fine parameters is based on the amount of weight over the I think for the first 1,000 pounds and up to 5,000 pounds and up to 10,000 pounds. The weight the fine is based on the weight as well. Working on Shane on House Bill 1006, and had very, very positive meeting with the Tax and Fiscal Chairman, the constituent who brought the bill to Shane. Had a meeting with him on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then I went and met with him. They met in the morning, I went and met in the afternoon. He's gonna hear the bill. I think he's gonna, and we have an amendment ready, but I think he's gonna wait and go ahead and have the hearing, hold it, and amend it as we get closer to the end of budget session to look at how much money to allocate to that mine reclamation redevelopment tax credit program. I think the House pushed it out with, what was it, $1.5 million, but they had to put something on it. They had to put. If they pass it out with nothing, then but as they calculate their budget on the House side, they've got to stick a number on it. I don't know that Representative Thompson was firm that it was going to be that or nothing. But we're going to look at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation's. They got a big grant, or whatever they call it, a closure fund that they want to be able to try to close on big projects. They want a bigger pool of money to work with, and our position is, okay, here's what you want, and because for the entirety of your career they've never offered a redevelopment tax credit to any reclaimed coal property, you wanted this amount of money, you'll get that total amount of money, but we're gonna pull part of that out and put it into this, and if you're gonna spend it, you have to spend it on this. Because when asked, how many counties of less than 50,000 have they ever offered a redevelopment tax credit grant to? 0. And until we tell them to do it, they won't do it. History's on our side. Working with Steve on the Indiana Craft Beverage Council bill. Looking forward to that. I think he's going to hear that bill Wednesday, so happy with that. Last year I worked on the solid waste grant program in Marion County. They had some money allocated from a prior program that would encourage folks to apply for grants to get more recycling equipment in use. Marion County's got a horrific record of probably the lowest recycling percentage in the state as far as counties. It would extend that grant program for 2 more years. I worked with that with Representative Speedy last year, and I'm going to carry that in the House. And then working with the auto service, the automobile dealers on some updates to their, we have franchises in place for car dealers, and there's not a lot of franchises laws in our state, but that's one that does have franchise protection. To protect the local dealer from aggressive behavior of the manufacturer, because if they're constantly, it's like whack-a-mole, with them. If it's not prohibited in statute, they try to, they're always being aggressive in their treatment of their franchise dealers. It extends the window of time that they have to do major renovations, from 7 years to 10 years. And it gives a variety. I think there's 6 different provisions that it gives a little more protection, for franchisees, from aggressiveness from the manufacturers. So looking forward to helping them try to push that across the line. So I think that's about all I got.
Well, that was quite a bit.
We got a lot of work.
I know. So when does the session actually end?
Statutorily, it has to be done by April 29th, but we will be done before that. I mean, the only budget cycle that I was here that we went the last day was my very first one, and we didn't get a budget done. That was in 2009. Every year since then, we've gotten done at least a week early. So I would expect, probably the Thursday, so the 29th, I think it's a Saturday. So the 27th would be kind of our normal, last day. The 20th, the week before. If I had to target a date, I would guess we'd be targeting more like the 20th. But that hasn't been determined yet. But as we get later in session, we'll wrap up. They'll probably just cut down conference committee time by a week is typically what we do. Instead of having 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks of conference committees, they say, all right, we're done with third reading on, April, whatever, 6th, 5th, or 6th. And, instead of having 2.5 weeks, you have a week and a half or a week. We just shorten that conference committee time. A lot of it will depend on when the budget revenue adjustments come out in April and how close or far apart the budget negotiators are. Because when the budget's done, we're done. If you got stuff hanging in conference committee and the budget's done, see you next year. So.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Phil, did you want to ask a question this time? Sorry, I didn't get your question last time. Can you hear him okay?
I'm asking in regard to Senate Bill 1601, Mark. It passed out of the House dealing with water regulatory stuff and forestry. I'm just curious if it's going to have a hearing in the Senate. It's not scheduled yet.
Well, it's probably assigned to a committee.
That's where we're supposed to look.
Yeah, she did not have a committee hearing, the first Monday after the break. But she probably doesn't have that many bills. She'll probably only have, she might have probably 1 hearing or 2. So we've got, several weeks to calendar it. Unless it had any huge objection in the House, I would imagine we'll move on.
My impression, Phil, is that it'll get a hearing. I can't guarantee that. Obviously, it's not in my authority to say that at this point. But I think talking with the author, I think he feels pretty confident that it'll get a hearing over there. So.
Okay, we do have one question. Where can the voters go to review the Indiana budget? Will it be detailed wherever you go to look at it? And what is the website for reviewing the budget?
I should have a website here.
Maybe use the microphone to answer that so everyone can.
So while he's looking up the actual website, it's what left the House is going to likely drastically change as it goes over to the Senate side.
Not drastically.
Maybe not drastically, but it will change.
It'll change.
So it'll change over there, and then once that change happens, Mark mentioned conference committee, so there'll be some horse trading and whatnot back and forth in there. So what passed the House is not the final version yet. So
That would be correct. So if you go to www.iga.in.gov/. legislative. I mean, once you get to that point, there's a thing that says, bills by legislator, by bill number. House Bill 1001 is the budget. And as on your screen, as you look at the House bills and the Senate bills, the very first bill, House Bill 1001, is the budget. You click that, and you can click a tab that says, bill details. And it'll give you all, whatever, 100 pages or whatever it is, of all the things that are in the budget. And if you're having trouble sleeping, some night, go ahead and pull that up and read it. And then there's a separate school funding, formula, page. There's probably, as you click down the details of the bills, it'll have the funding, by school district. But that will, I'm sure, especially the details of that always changes when things come from the House to the Senate and Conference Committee. But it'll give you a pretty good idea, of the basic framework of what's in it.
That's a good thing. There's several members of the media here too, so you can make sure that you get that posted. So. Any other questions this morning? Matt? Go ahead, just shout it out.
Do you have something you need to say?
Go ahead.
Okay, so this is towards Mr. Bartels. So in regards to you mentioned 2 bills regarding police stuff. So in regards to the one for the camera footage, is there a cap on the amount that a department can charge for that footage in the bill?
There is not.
So do you see that as kind of problematic? Because they had to add it to documents that we asked for from other government entities in the past, where they can't overcharge us for that information.
Yeah, the process is the same, right? So, we don't dictate what a copy costs at local units of government. That's kind of on them. So I guess if it seems something that's overburdensome locally, you'll just have to deal with that locally. We're not going to, as the state, dictate that amount.
So in the 25-foot rule, I've got about 4 questions here. So what is the level of the criminal charge that somebody could be facing for that? And how, actually, if you could maybe go into a little more detail on that, like how would an officer use that in the course of his duties?
So the intent is once an officer is engaged with a citizen that they have rightful cause to detain, and other people start gathering around, the officer has the right to say, I have this 25-foot, get back. It would become a misdemeanor possibly if it's violated.
Okay. So is there a process in place that they could warn the citizens that maybe are around him?
That they have to.
Okay. So do you feel like this might be kind of redundant with like the other charges, like interfering with an investigation or something?
So it kind of goes hand in hand, and if you look at those 2 statutes, you'll see there are specific differences. The intent here is to say we're going to defuse the situation by not having citizens up in law enforcement right next to them where they feel there's a confrontation and they can't react. So they can't make that split-second decision to go from potentially what does my stance needs to be from the force continuum. So it's just to give the officers more opportunity to say, look, here's where you need to stay back. You get to that point, I've already warned you. I have the authority to arrest you.
Do you think this impedes people from recording police officers?
No, it has nothing to do with cameras or that stuff.
But if you push them back to 25 feet, it becomes harder to hear what they're saying and doing.
The intent is 21-foot rule. Our academy teaches that. The 25 was picked as an agreement between all parties and stakeholders, so that's where the intent comes. It needs to be more than 21 feet.
And that's protection for the police officers.
Yeah, that's actually, it's for protection of police officers and the citizen that's engaged. In my experience in domestic, you're trying to arrest somebody for domestic violence, and then the other party comes in and they've turned on you. Now they're against you for the person that might have had violence against them. So it's just a mechanism, another tool for law enforcement.
Well, on the other side of that, I'm worried as an individual in the media, if I go to a situation and I'm talking to somebody that's a witness, and this has happened to me. I've had a fire inspector come up or a marshal come up to me and say, you need to stop talking to them. I want to talk to this individual. You're impeding my investigation, right? Whenever, they just come over and they just take over what I'm asking this individual, and I've asked them, can I finish talking to them? And they'll immediately say that. So what I'm concerned about is if I'm on the scene of a situation, could a police officer just arbitrarily say, you're within my 25-foot area, that's a safety area, which I recognize that. I'm a trained law enforcement officer, So I recognize that, but can they just arbitrarily arrest me and charge me for the misdemeanor because I'm there as part of the media watching this occur?
Not until they warned you. So once you've given that warning, the bill says they have the authority, but you do have to be warned first. And as you're thinking of other questions, I just want to bring up something that really doesn't pertain to Du Bois County yet, but there is a pilot program, and Senator Messmer brought this up, and they clicked the 1355. We've heard this for a long time about this merging of our townships. And we were able to start a pilot program that's passed the House, it's going to the Senate. There are 3 counties that got picked, selected in Crawford County, your neighbor's one of them. So we're going to see how this process of merging townships work and trying to get a battle plan, so to speak, that where the state is going to help pay for this merger. It's like, how do you facilitate your fire departments? How do you facilitate the mowing and cemetery issues and poorly? So I think it's a good opportunity for Crawford. And I think you're going to see that hopefully there'll be some kind of a outline of what we can do in other counties to make this more efficient for our counties.
I do want to close on one item, and I've gotten a lot of email, or at least I've seen a lot, and I've seen, not a lot of email, some email, and I've seen a lot of social media posts dealing with Senate Bill 12. And Senate Bill 12 is the goal of it is to keep pornography out of our school libraries. It only applies to school libraries. It does not apply to public libraries. And I brought some, and I'm not going to hand it out if you would like to see it. And I did have a list of 12 of them, some of the more, 12 of the more egregious books that were and charted. So they went to in 92 counties. They went to public schools that had their library content posted online, and made a list of which schools in those counties, have these books. And I challenge any one of you, if you disagree with me, to come up here and read any of this content to the group. It would embarrass you. It would sicken you. And for this, the process that this bill sets up is, if a parent, and it could probably use some minor tweaking. If a parent deems, feels like they've got content harmful to a minor in their library, they first petition the principal to take it out. And if the principal says no, then they petition the school board to take it out. And if the school board says no, then they could take it to a prosecutor to ask for it to be deemed content harmful to a minor. And for it to be it has to meet the obscenity statutes that are in place, or it has to meet the content harmful to minors that is already in place. And for content harmful to a minor, it says it has to describe or represent in any form nudity, sexual conduct, sexual excitement, or sadomasochistic abuse. It has to be considered as a whole. It appeals to the prurient interest of sex to minors. It is patently offensive and prevailing standards in the adult community as a whole with respect to what is suitable manner for or performance before minors, and it has to be considered as a whole to lack serious literary content, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. And it has to be deemed obscene by the obscenity statutes or content harmful to a minor. And the problem is today, K through 12 libraries have an educational protection. They can just say, we consider it educational material. And so stuff like this, that I will not show on the camera, you can come up and see it, is considered educational content, and it's in our libraries.
So to continue on that, I've obviously heard there's a petition that's gone out now and has been sent to me to vote against it, and certainly folks are using it to rile up people against Senator Messmer as well. And the verbiage that's out there is that we're banning books, and the typical Nazi language applied to us has been used as well. And so I would just point out that there's no banning of books happening. It's prohibiting the books from being in school libraries. If a parent wants this kid to have any of these books that are over here, I use the word books lightly, or but they can still do that. They can still go to the public library, get the book. They can go to Amazon, get the book. We're not banning books in Indiana, so that's just nonsense.
And these 4 books were checked out of the Jasper library yesterday. And there was a couple more that were at the Du Bois library. I just didn't really want to drive to Du Bois, to get more of them. And I think one of them was at Vernon. So 4 of the 12 books they had, there was a couple more that they had that somebody had checked out. And there were some of these at Du Bois. But it's got the list of the books. I've got tabbed, and I painstakingly went through these books last night and tabbed them. And I challenge any of you to read any of those tabs and tell me that these are AR books. What, my kids have been out of school a while. When do they have AR? What, from grade 2 to first grade until middle school? These are AR books. This is an AR level 3.8. You got to tell me, and that should be a 3rd or 4th grade equivalent reading. Tell me that this is appropriate for a 3rd or 4th grader. Not even a high schooler should be reading this stuff. And this is an AR book out of the Jasper Public Library. And this stuff is sickening. And it's considered protected educational material. And these are all in our school libraries. I didn't go. They didn't have in Du Bois County. They went to the websites of each of the schools, one school in each county, and Du Bois's library had 3. But all of these books are and we have to legislate the state as a whole. Now, does that mean every school has every one of these books? No, but they all exist in school libraries across the state, and some of this stuff it's depicted in the cartoon characters to make you think it's somehow less obscene. You would be grossed out by the stuff that's in our libraries today.
And so I've actually had a discussion with Dr. Laura here in town about this already. And Mark indicated this as well, that most schools have a policy in place. Dr. Laura, indicated, yes, they have a policy in place. It's not been utilized by parents. I hope, I welcome the noise that's come from this bill, the articles that have been out there about this bill, because I count myself on the list of a level of ignorance. I didn't know what was in our local schools. So this isn't singling out Jasper or Du Bois or whomever. This has been found in 83. That's what's been found in 83 of our public school libraries, 83 counties around the state. So 92 counties. This crap has been found in 83 of the counties in at least one school or another. So again, going back to conversation with Dr. Laura, there's a policy in place. They are actively looking at these books. She assures me they're looking into them. I don't ascribe anything nefarious at all to Tracy Lori. I think we have gotten to the point where we kind of put things on autopilot and we don't know what's in our schools anymore. And I think that we need to, as parents, as taxpayers, whether you're a parent or not, if you're a taxpayer, do you want this stuff going into our schools? And so the problem was there are parents from other parts of the state that have been in this game a lot longer than I have, who have identified these books and have gone to their school boards and have gone to their administrators and have been told, too bad. Like Mark said, they're protected. We're protected. We're keeping this stuff in our schools. So parents have had no recourse. So the reason for the bill is to give parents another avenue of recourse to get this garbage out of the schools. Nobody's going to march into Jasper High School and throw the librarian in handcuffs because a parent found one of these books in there. In practice, there's going to be a process that's walked through. And so again, the nonsense that's been out there about banning books and all this other stuff, and I would challenge you to, I've got some of the materials here. I've been part of several discussions where we, as legislators, are literally scared to send this crap via email because of what it could mean if it's found on our computer. And so every time I've emailed this stuff, I say, look, there's like Mark said, it's nothing. It's not like opening a penthouse or something. It's drawings, but it's plenty graphic, and then you count even the stuff without the pictures is pornography. I don't know how else to describe it. It's straight pornography. So no reason to be in our public schools. So, but I welcome you. If you have any questions on it, come up and take a look at the books. Mark's got stuff. I've got some stuff. Not handing it out because of what we just said, but you're welcome to take a look at it. So.
All right, I think we'll kind of use that as a wrap up. Thank you for everything that you do at the state level to protect all of us and to make sure that things for Indiana are the way they're supposed to be. So thank you all of you for showing up today. And anyway, have a great day.